Hey everybody, welcome to part one of a new series that I'm doing. So after I posted about my experience losing 100 pounds, I got literally thousands of comments and questions from people, all kind of asking the same thing, which is how did you do it? And then a little bit more specifically, what kinds of therapies, what kind of modalities worked for you? Because I have ADHD, I'm autistic, I deal with interoception issues, I deal with somatic issues, brain body connection stuff, alexithymia, like it's a hot mess. And I want to be really transparent and I really want to be honest about the process. And so I sort of sat down and broke it into its component pieces, all of the different stuff that I had to work on in order to get to where I am now. And so for each one, I have written like a little essay, and I'm just going to read it because I feel like it's better than trying to do like take after take of explaining it perfectly. So I sat down and I wrote these essays. I'm going to drop a new essay every Friday for the next few weeks. I'll put the text and the video, and so you can listen or you can read it. You can do whatever works for you and your brain. But yeah, so I'm going to do the intro like once on this video, and then I'm just going to like jump into the video after that because I don't want to have to keep reading the intro. Do you know what I mean? Okay. So anyway, here we go. Welcome to the intro. A couple of things going in. First, this is not medical advice, nor can I guarantee that anything that worked for me will work for you. We are different people with different experiences, and it is beautiful and lovely that we can coexist. My experience is not yours, and if you do not see yourself represented in this story, then this story may not be for you, and I honor and validate that, and I truly wish you well. Second, I am going to be honest here. This writing, this video, this is your trigger warning, this is your content warning. We are going to be talking about disability and pain and eating disorders and all of that kind of stuff. So if you are not in a place to receive that or listen to that, be kind to yourself, be compassionate with yourself, come back when you're ready. But I'm just saying that ahead of time. And also, I just want to warn you that I am going to be more honest here than you are probably used to seeing me. And part of that is because I want to be direct about the challenges that I was facing and how truly, actually, for really hard it was, and how hard I had to work to get where I am in my recovery. And I'm sharing all of this because I want you to know that if you are struggling with similar things, you are allowed to want something different. You are allowed to work towards feeling better. The work is hard. It can feel difficult. It can feel impossible. But even when it feels insurmountable and impossible and difficult, I hope that you hear my story and it resonates. So, yeah, with all of that being said, let us. I want you to know going in that I was furious. I was furious after every new doctor's appointment with no answers. I was furious with every therapist who kept telling me I needed to work on feeling my feelings. I was furious with myself because my pain was constant and my mobility continued to diminish week by week. And I was angry at the system as I searched for a solution to the shooting pains that would run down the front of my leg and through my hip, as the numbness in my feet continued to spread, as I dealt with ongoing strain in my relationships, as I navigated a complex soup of anger and resentment and guilt and frustration, and the lingering question, was this ever going to get better? I knew I was dealing with several bulging discs and several in various states of degeneration. This had been true since high school. But the issues had only gotten progressively worse over the years. Regardless, and this is super important for you to understand, regardless of whether or not I was overweight, I started noticing numbness in my feet, almost like neuropathy. I started having trouble walking. I'd have shooting pains in my hip and back all the time. And nothing I did or tried helped. I have spent my adult life facilitating wildly between a healthy mid-size weight for my 5'6" frame to visibly fat. Size 6, size 16, size 24. My closet looks like a thrift store donation bin with the gamut of sizes. When my doctor suggested that my weight might be the reason I was struggling, I was incensed. Yes, fine, I was overweight. I gained weight during the pandemic after losing my incredibly physical job. more after I got my book deal and turned from at least somewhat active to nearly sedentary, more after that first bout of sedentary book writing led to a thrown out back and further weight gain, more after the second round of that, more after the third, but my blood work was consistently fine. My heart rate was normal, my blood pressure was exemplary. The usual x-rays showed the usual issues, but nothing out of place or visibly wrong. And when I could, on good days, I moved. I took walks. I genuinely enjoyed lifting weights. Aside from the nagging, constant lightening in my hip, I was healthy. If you didn't count the bulging and degenerating disc that stopped me from being able to walk my dog, I was pretty much fine. If you didn't count the lingering shortness of breath from COVID that only seemed to hit when I was walking upstairs, I was honestly doing really well. I kept trying to explain over and over that this had been a problem before the weight gain. This had been a problem since 70 pounds ago. How dare this doctor dismiss me out of hand? How dare this fatphobic jerk tell me that my fat body was the root cause and that if I only changed that single thing, all of my problems would be solved. It wasn't just one doctor. Over the next year, and trying unsuccessfully to source the cause of my chronic pain, I went to a number of doctors and specialists around the country. Over and over, my normal test results and imaging scans reinforced what I already knew to be true, that I was mostly healthy. There was just something wrong. But over and over, my weight would come up. Sometimes gingerly, sometimes so hesitantly it felt passive-aggressive, sometimes actually passive-aggressive. But it was really hard for me to hear. How dare they tell me that to be deserving of care, I would have to change my body? I was even more furious the day that the diagnostics I'd fought and insisted and at one point begged for finally came in. The specialized MRI showed that there was something wrong. For me, the root cause of my pain and nerve issues is a rare condition called Spinal Epidural Lipomatosis, or SEL, a condition where fat tissue accumulates in the spinal column. If there's too much fat in the spinal column, it puts pressure on the nerves and destabilizes the discs, causing pain, numbness, incontinence, difficulty walking, and making me more susceptible to back injury. SEL explained everything. The numbness, the shooting pains, why every injury seemed to compound the last. Pretty much simply, the more weight you gain, the more you risk fat accumulating and the worse you get. The diagnosis of SEL was as liberating as it was validating. Finally, I had an answer. Finally, I had a face and a name to blame for the days I'd spent crying myself to sleep in pain and the nights I spent awake on the bedroom floor, unable to get up into the bed. The canceled plans, the ruined vacations, the unbearable pain, the incontinence part that became something of a notable issue, which I will avoid mentioning further on Beyonce's internet. I hadn't been making it up. I hadn't been being dramatic. It wasn't all in my head. I was triumphantly vindicated and desperately humiliated all at once. My humiliation surged when I learned that two things are true. SEL is a condition that can happen idiopathically, so it just kind of happens, but a large percentage of cases are related to obesity, and, I quote from a study, losing weight will decrease the likelihood of failed management and avoid the need for surgical intervention. My anger was generalized towards myself for letting myself get to this point again, and my doctor for being fucking right and being such a goddamn dick about it, at the medical establishment that hadn't taken me seriously because I was a fat person seeking answers. And the thought that constantly haunted me after diagnosis was, it is because you're fat. It is because you're fat. They were right. They were right. They were right. They were right. So then I started to feel like Shrek. Onions. Layers. My weight was medically relevant to my pain, and I'd been medically neglected because of my weight. If doctors had taken me seriously in the first place instead of dismissing everything as a weight issue, my condition never would have gotten this bad. I might never have gained so much weight to begin with, and then maybe my injuries wouldn't have been so bad, so maybe layers. If my weight had to be part of the conversation, I had to start with a really tough question. What if this never stopped? What if the cycle I was stuck in, injury, weight gain, binging and purging, losing weight, injuring again, gaining again, what if it just kept getting worse? Now I had the SEL diagnosis. I knew what was causing my symptoms to worsen, And I had the frustratingly raw knowledge that it was directly related to my weight, which meant that I had a choice that wasn't much of a choice at all: completely overhaul my entire existence or continue to get worse. The thing that I need to pause here and say is that I still experience chronic pain. Literally, right now, as I am writing this. Shooting fire is running down my hip like this, and I'm trying to sort of calm the bright, hot white of my hip joint with a giant ice pack. I took it off when I recorded the video. I'm sorry. I have not done much of anything today. No walks, no runs, just a hobble down the stairs to let Bailey out into the yard. In no way am I saying that what I have done is cure my chronic, always going to be there pain. Last week, I moved a potted monstera up the stairs and once again fucked up good old disc L3, 4, and 5, which took me out of commission for 3 days. It is desperately important that you understand that chronic and disabling pain is not something you can cure or fix, and that is true and real and valid. And here's where it got complicated in my head. It is also real and valid and true that other disabled people have more complex experiences and challenges, and approaching them from the standpoint of, ugh, I never want to live like that, is ableist. Wheelchair users, mobility aid users like me, complexly disabled people, deaf, visually impaired, whatever, to look at a community and say, I'd rather be dead than fill in the blank, or I couldn't imagine not being able to fill in the blank, that makes you a dick, actually. Disabled people live rich and full and rewarding lives, and literally none of them exist to be your inspiration porn. There is nothing wrong with being disabled, nor should disabled people be expected or want to look for a cure. I knew that, and as someone who advocates and educates about neurodivergence and disability for my job, I struggle deeply with this duality. Of course, I could live a fulfilling and rewarding life as a wheelchair user, so if I chose to lose weight, if I chose to improve my mobility, was I saying that there was something wrong or bad about living in a disabled or fat body? Now, you, dear reader, may not have the experience of having hundreds of millions of eyes on your content every year, and so the last part might not be particularly relatable, which is something that I learned when I told my therapist all of that, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And she stared at me in stunned silence for like 30 interrupted seconds before she said, "Bit self-important, don't you think?" I remember being so defensive. And then she said something along the lines of, "You know that taking care of yourself isn't the same thing as saying that there's something wrong with needing care, right?" So I spent the next couple of months unpacking deeply held beliefs about myself, my worth, my value, what I deserved or didn't deserve based on the traumas and wounds of a complex childhood as an adopted kid with parents who, despite doing their best, were unequipped to deal with the undiagnosed neurodivergent goblin they had been given. I started examining my unmet needs. How I'd been taught that my big feelings were wrong and bad, taught that my needs didn't matter, that my reaction to loud noises and bad taste were overdramatic. How my parents' emotional immaturity and explosive anger had turned me into a hyper-vigilant people pleaser, and how I'd turned those experiences into endless thought spirals to justify basic, simple self-care decisions. This next part is really hard for me, but I promise you honesty, dear reader. So I will also admit that there was a part of me that liked the attention. I realized in therapy that in giving of myself at home and at work and relationships, I lacked the feeling of being taken care of. That need for care, for tenderness, for, hey, it's going to be okay. That was showing up in how I handled my disability, particularly with my partners. I was leveraging my physical challenges into having my emotional needs met, and that was deeply unfair to them and manipulative of me. While we're being messy, I also had to ditch my self-important main character syndrome because in some ways I turned a lot of my choices about my own body into this complex ethical calculation about disability politics and public perception when maybe it was more about just me personally being able to walk my dog at age 40. It was exhausting to do this work, and I wasn't even doing the work yet. I had to get really honest about which beliefs were protecting me and which were just keeping me stuck. Some of the rhetoric I'd clung to about body positivity and health at every size, rhetoric that is true and valid and important, it had become a shield that I was using to avoid asking myself hard questions about what I actually wanted for my own life. I think some of that came from being a visible person on the internet, and that comes with its own challenges. I had to do a surprising amount of work to convince myself that maybe a couple of mean comments from angry, bored people on the internet might not be a reason to actively try not to preserve my mobility. And from where I am now with the therapy tools I have, I know that it sounds ridiculous, but nobody trains you to be a creator in the public eye. And so I didn't have anybody to point out that I put an unsustainable and unfair and main character as burden on myself. I realized that I was exhausted, not just from the process, but by the way that I'd internalized you, dear reader. And that was never perhaps fair to you either. I didn't feel like I could try to reduce my pain or improve my mobility because I wanted to be in less pain. I felt like I had to justify it against these made up accusations of ableism and fatphobia, internalized patriarchal beauty standards, whatever. The irony here is that I have worked hard to make sure that I do understand disability justice. I went back to school because the lack of disability inclusion in sex education. I know intellectually that individual medical decisions aren't moral referendums, but knowing something professionally and giving yourself permission personally are entirely different things when you know that hundreds of millions of eyes are watching. So I put a post-it on my mirror and I read it out loud every morning. I'm in pain and I want to hurt less is not an unreasonable sentence. And every morning I'd roll my eyes and I'd brat about it. But slowly, a little bit at a time, the intellectualizing that I'd done, the walls I'd put up, the justifications, the anger, the excuses, I started to break it down and build a new understanding of myself and my needs. One day, in a not very important way, I realized that it was time to decide. And in a deeply not very momentous moment at around 2:34 a.m. on some random Tuesday in April, I reluctantly and hesitantly and very non-committally decided that at the very worst, maybe trying to just get a little bit better might not be the worst idea. And that is how easy it was to just decide to start making changes. Part 2 next week is going to be about everything that came after that very simple, very straightforward decision. And hey, really quick, if you're reading this or listening to this and something in you recognize yourself, the fury, the anger, the justifications, and the exhaustion of carrying beliefs that have stopped serving you, I want you to know that wanting to feel better is not a betrayal. You can believe truly and completely that all bodies are worthy of respect and dignity, and also decide that you personally want to make changes to reduce your own suffering. Those things don't cancel each other out. You're allowed to want to feel better. Thanks for watching.